Hello, welcome to The Rightist Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie, the podcast for the politically homeless. This is a two-part episode entitled Why I Left the Greens and the Case for Independence. In the first episode, I'm going to be expounding upon my reasons for leaving the Greens Party and why I believe that they no longer represent everyday Aussies, and my journey through being a pretty loyal Greens voter to the point of being a donor, and to where I am now, being an independent and what I would consider to be politically homeless, and why I think independents are much more suited to taking that role in the crossbench rather than the Greens. So I'm going to have a bit of a structure to this video in terms of what we're going to look at first is just a bit of a history of the Greens and a background, so you understand a bit of the context of the Greens. If you've heard of that party, you might be coming from a right-wing perspective, thinking they're a bunch of lunatics with ridiculous ideas that will never get implemented, or you might be a Greens voter or a Labour voter who may be a bit more in tune with their ideas or believe in their ideas, but may strongly still be a supporter of the Greens or be skeptical of their approach as well. I think at the very least we can acknowledge they didn't do well at this election overall. They did okay in the Senate, but in the House of Representatives they lost 3 of their 4 seats, and the leader Adam Band lost his seat, and that led to a change in leadership, which I do hope serves them well. I don't think they're a bad party, but I do think that their influence in Australian politics moving forward has been greatly diminished, and I don't really see that coming back. So let's have a look, first of all, just at a quick, brief history of the Greens. Now, I don't want this to become a real history lesson, but what I do want to highlight is the 4 pillars, and I think I want to be fair to them as well, because I am going to be very critical, but I think I want to look at the positives that the Greens bring and what they were founded upon. So they identify 4 pillars in their movement. That would be environmental sustainability, social and economic justice, grassroots democracy, and peace and non-violence. All things which I think are very important. I have a sort of a different focus and arrangement of those priorities, but I think as 4 pillars to build a political party on, a very strong approach. Now, I've just created an infographic. I'm shamelessly going to say I did use AI to do it, but it looks pretty nice, so I think it's a good summary as well. So there was a Lake Pedder and the Franklin Dam project in Tasmania, and there were a few Tasmanian group that formed that were not formally the party, but they basically got together to protest a few dam projects in Tasmania, and they were successful in having those projects not go ahead. And then Bob Brown became sort of the activist and future leader of the Green Party in that time. So they formally started at the same year I did. I was born in 1992, and so was the Australian Greens Party. So they're both 32 years old. They both so in 1996, then Bob Brown was the first senator elected, and so a first Green member for Parliament. And then they slowly expanded in the Senate in 2002. And in 2010, they had 11.76% Senate vote, which was their record high at that time. And then they held 9 seats, so they had the balance of power in the Senate. And then Adam Band won Melbourne, and so he was the first Greens member of the House of Representatives. They slowly gained over time, and then in 2022, they call it their Green Slide. If we have a look at their version of it, they've described it as the Green Slide. And basically what happened was they got 4 members represented. So the Melbourne Band got his seat back, and then 3 seats in inner city Brisbane in Queensland. So Griffith, Ryan and Brisbane 3 seats in Queensland. They had their highest primary vote in Queensland, and they became the 3rd largest party in the federal parliament. what has happened in the last election that just occurred was a little bit of a different result. So if we look here, I showed this, I'm a fan of the poll bludger, and I like to show these results whenever I can, because I think they're very accurate, considering the votes haven't fully been counted yet, but they're pretty accurate to the overall result. The Greens didn't do too badly overall. They retained mostly their amount of primary votes, so they only lost 0.1%, but they lost 3% of their seats. In the Senate, which everyone likes to point out, I don't focus on too much, but let's have a look here. There's still counting, but it looks like what's happened is they're pretty decisive. I don't think any Senate seats are up for dispute now. All the ones have been confirmed. So there was already 5 continuing senators, and then 6 of them in this Senate election they won. So that's 11 seats. I don't think we have a breakdown, but basically what that does, if we did it as a pie chart, is now the Greens and the Labor Party, if they want to, can work together to get bills and legislation passed in the Senate. So the Greens have what they call the balance of power. And I think that is one thing, to be fair to the Greens. So I want to start off with their strengths, and then I'm going to slide that into the criticism of the Greens and why my sort of journey through working with them. As you can see here, this is their plan, and their focus here, which I think is one of the best policies, is to tax big corporations and multinational companies and the billionaires. So their billionaires and big corporation tax is a great idea. And the reality that 1 in 3 big corporations pay zero tax is just disgusting. And it's something that is one of the reasons I really never fully switch to the right wing, so long as they support those big businesses. And the other thing that they highlight too is, as I'm sort of saying, they are a party, but the idea of the parties are the problem. Labor and the Liberals both take millions in donations from these corporations. So any Labor people, Labor is considered, it has a left and a right wing fraction, but depending on who you ask, they're sort of centre left, and therefore people think that they're not free of corruption, but that's not true. Labor definitely they have maybe not exactly the same donors, but in some cases, like with the mining and the gambling industries, Labor have huge donors as well. And so they're compromised. Even though they won huge this election, they're very much compromised, and the Greens see their position as holding Labor accountable to the policies they say that they're going to enact. So one thing that the Greens talk about, and I want to find it here because so I'll just type this in. Greens balance of power, my excellent writing. Yeah, so this is the ACT. Let me just explain it myself. So the Greens don't think, and this is what Adam Bandt as a leader clearly stated, was that they don't ever market themselves as they're going to be the party in power. Adam Bandt is very realistic, and even though he's not elected anymore, he didn't think he was ever going to become prime minister. He saw the Greens' job as holding that balance of power, because if you have a certain amount of Liberal seats and a certain amount of Labor seats, if neither of them have the most seats, which is something now that rarely happens, there's that crossbench, they call it, in the middle, that the bigger parties have to do deals with in order to get things passed. So if Labor said, and this is what happened, they had a housing policy, and they want to invest a certain amount of money in housing, and the Greens wanted it to be more, which is something that happened, they would have to do deals with each other to get those passed. So one that's really great is that I believe as well is with healthcare. Greens argue for a truly universal healthcare system, and there's a lot of aspects to that, and I can't sum it all up in one video, and I can do deep dives in that, especially my expertise is around the mental health. But I've always said, and I was I had to vote for the Greens this election in my area because none of the other parties, it was either Liberal or Labor or a couple of right-wing parties. The Greens party was the only one that I could bring myself to vote for. I wanted to vote for an independent. I think the Greens could have won just on this one policy alone of putting dental into Medicare. The fact that if you break a bone and you go to the hospital or to get treated, you don't pay anything, but you chip a tooth and that could cost you thousands of dollars in your dentist is ridiculous. Now, I've seen basically what Labor's reason for not putting it into Medicare is that we can't afford it, or that there's not enough dentists. So it's a supply issue in terms of if we put dental into Medicare, that will increase the demand and we don't have enough dentists. And that's really, for me, why, I've clearly said why I can't go to the right wing, because of their support for big businesses and corporations. The why I can never bring myself to go to Labor is because they're kind of the you can't have nice things party, or things that really can be done, which, like putting dental into Medicare, there will be an adjustment period of having to possibly train up more dentists or longer wait times when people who have not had dental care for years or even decades actually can now afford to go because it's on Medicare. That's good for society, and we need to figure out a way to do it, and we need to get it done. And the Greens, and at the very least, some of their ideas definitely can be a bit pie in the sky, and we're going to get to that in the criticism. But I just really want to highlight that the Greens do have, look at mental health here as well, proper investment into the mental health community, mental health services, and then members of the community that don't get those mental health services. The Greens actually have policies that really would benefit everyday Aussies. They really do. And you might think they go a little bit too far, or they might be a bit against your values, like with pill testing. We know that if you test pills, music festival and things, this is harm minimization. Young adults, teenagers are going to try drugs. So if you're a conservative parent and you think that that's not going to happen with your kids, it's a safety approach that the Greens recognize. We need to, something like pill testing, we need to make that improved and funded so people don't die from drug overdoses, because they're not going to listen to that message about don't do drugs, kids. They're going to try it, and we want them to be safe. So the Greens are actually very in line with reality on a lot of policies, and they have some really good economic policies, like, again, the taxing the big corporations, and they have specific ways to bring that in. So certain percentages of taxes on different like profits when the corporation has over $100 million. So they have very specific numbers, and then they talk about how they're going to further build that and where that money is going to then be spent. So like banning that supermarket price gouging to make food cheaper. The Greens spearheaded the investigations into Coles and Woolies, and I do not think that they get enough credit for that. Economically, I think the Greens policies, yes, they require a shift in thinking, and it is a bit of a different system, but it can still be done through a capitalist system, I believe. Maybe some hardcore Greens members who are maybe more socialist or communist, maybe that's where we divert, but I think they have some very common sense policies. But now the criticism. The Greens have lost their way. They have got very much caught up on small battles that I think are not important at all. Now, I don't know if they put any of those first. Like, let's have a look at one here, which I do think truth, treating justice for First Nations people, I think is very important. But then some of the things that they will talk about, and actually, look, at least in the plan here, a lot of these things I would agree with. Maybe we have to look at, the specifics as well. So that's like one of the questions from the ABC's poll about establishing the National Truth and Justice Commission to look into what happened and all of that. Really good ideas. But again, I, like everyone, don't want my tax money to be wasted. I want it to be spent well. I would need to see a greater detail in that plan before I could support it. But I think where the Greens get caught up, and I think it is partly their own marketing and also the perception of them, is that they focus on these little social justice issues that really don't affect everyday Aussies. Like, there is nothing wrong with advocating for people that are in marginalized communities, like the LGBT population, or the Aboriginal population, I think that's good because I consider everyone to be everyday Aussies. And if you're from a different background, or if you choose a different way of life, or you realize that you have a different sexuality or that you're transgender, I think the government shouldn't be telling you how to live your life. I think the government should just back off and let you live your life. But the Greens have a bit of a militant approach to that, and it can come across as very as people feeling excluded and not a part of their party. So they kind of have the opposite problem to the Liberals. The Liberals market to the everyday Aussie, but their policies benefit a small segment of the population, which I think is the wealthy. And the Greens' policies benefit most everyday Aussies. Most of their policies will benefit everyday Aussies, but they market to a very small defined group. And I think that group is, as I've defined it before, inner city. Their seats have all been won in the inner cities. Younger people, and people that are more environmentally conscious, or on the left wing of politics, or more socially lower socioeconomic status, like renters and people that use public transport, because a lot of their policies, as you can see here, a lot of their cost of living support, we can have a look at some of those policies as well, and a lot of that is like the dental into Medicare and all of that, but they want to look at like 50% public transport fees, cap rent increases. So they're very much for marginalized people or people on the lower socioeconomic scale, and that's fine. Like, there is nothing wrong with wanting to bring, I agree with that, bringing that floor up. I think the way they do it though is it makes people who are also everyday Aussies, like hard workers who own houses or maybe own one investment property, or a little bit more socially conservative. I think the Greens, I don't think they bring those people in. I don't necessarily think they push those people away, but I think the Greens don't market to those people. They don't say you're part of what we want to do. Now, things like free high quality childcare, and they also want to help first home buyers, and things that would help like parents and everyday people, and their anti-corruption and integrity policies, which we could have a look at as well, are really great and would benefit those everyday Aussies. I think it's just that the marketing of the Greens, of that this is what we're about and who we're for, gets missed on a lot of those people. And now I gave the unsolicited advice to the party. Can they change that? I know Lisa Waters is going to be the new leader of the party, and can she change that? I am very doubtful. I think there's an article here which is great about Greens election hubris, how the minor party lost its way and now its leader. The Greens, I think, are now seen as obstructionist. I think they're seen now as, we're going to have to get all of this or we're going to get none of this. And that came out through the housing policy, and a lot of other policies where the Greens, they even teamed up with the Liberals to kill one of the Labor's bills, and they've just been seen as, it's our way or the highway. And unfortunately, when you're a minor party, you have some power, but you don't have that much power. And I think Albanese, I didn't like the way he talked about the Greens, that he said he would never do like a deal. I think he didn't say he wouldn't work with them, but he would never do like an alliance or a coalition with the Greens. So Labor are defining themselves against the Greens. And it's hard to argue, like if you look at Labor's, they increased their margin and won 18 seats. The Greens need to take a look at that and say, what happened? Why did a lot of people, again, didn't lose overall that many votes, but why do people seem to be shifting away from this party? And that is a very, very complicated question. I think that the biggest reason for that, from my point of view, and I might be wrong, and I'd love to speak to Green Party candidates or politicians or people within the party, why they feel, what message they were getting from people as to why that was. Because, again, on paper, a lot of these policies look amazing. Some people may have issue with their implementation, but at the very least, the Greens at least talked about that. And I think this is a good time to transition into me talking about my involvement in the Greens Party. So when I was sort of at university studying psychology, and starting as like most young adults do, just getting my head around politics and understanding of what was going on, my family, as far as I know, mostly vote Liberal. And so I was sort of, I don't want to say indoctrinated, but I knew quite a bit more about the Liberal Party. The Labor Party seemed, if you're like, so I turned 18 in 2010, so that was like sort of not peak Labor, but Kevin Rudd had just won, and there was Julia Gillard at that time. That was the first election that I voted in. I started, as I read more into it, I didn't really feel like either of the big parties represented me. I've always been a bit against, a bit alternative and against the mainstream, and I like to support the underdog, as you might have already noticed. And when I came across the Greens Party and what they stood for, I just thought it was all very common sense to me. I now sort of understand that I was right in that target demographic of, I was a young person, lived sort of close to the inner city. Even though my family were okay, I struggled financially. I did have a car, but cost of living was always huge on my mind because I was a student barely making any money. And I cared about the environment. I don't just care about myself and my life, and when I die, I don't care about what happens after me. I want humanity to live on. I want the world to be a livable place for future generations. So the Greens Party really, really spoke to me. And essentially, I voted for them in every election since I could vote. Except I think one election I did vote Liberals. It was very early on. It might have been 2013. I don't know if I can check that, but I don't think I voted for Greens every election, but pretty much every election. And to the point then when I started earning a bit of money and having a proper job, I became a member, and I was a donor to the Greens Party. And that led me to the point of getting involved in a campaign. It was for the 2022 election. I won't name the particular campaign or the candidate because I don't think that's entirely relevant. It's more just about my experience of working in the party. So I started in 2021 as kind of a volunteer coordinator engagement volunteer, as I guess you would call the title. So my role was to sort of see the pool of volunteers that we had and try and bring more people on. And I was very early on in the campaign. The election hadn't even been called, so I was just getting prepared for that. And one of the first things I noticed was that, first of all the people working there were great. The candidate was great, and all the people. It wasn't that there was no, I wouldn't say bad people, and it wasn't a toxic environment. It was actually a very supportive environment. But there was just, grassroots campaigns can bring a feeling of chaos as well if there isn't a structure. At that point, there wasn't even a campaign manager, and everyone was sort of just doing things, and there wasn't really a big picture plan. And for me, I need that sort of structure, and I didn't feel like that campaign had it. And I was starting to get this sense of dread, like, I don't think this candidate's going to win. But that doesn't mean I should lose hope. I should have faith that that's going to happen. But I am a bit Trump-like that, where Trump said once, I asked him in the election before Hillary Clinton, if you lose, would you still consider that there's some value in that? And Trump just said, no, I'd consider it the biggest waste of time, effort and money in my life. And at that time I thought, well, there's such things as like a symbolic victory, or if you increase your margin from last time, isn't that good too? But I sort of get that now, that you should, if you're going to run for an election, there are, realities. Like if you're the underdog, fine, acknowledge that. But you should be in it to win it. And I do think the candidate was in it to win it, but I wasn't getting that energy when working in the campaign. The candidate went on to lose, not by much. It was quite it was one of the seats that the Greens do well in. So the candidate did really well, but didn't win. I should have mentioned too, I didn't see it through the campaign. I had some personal things going on. I was in the middle of getting married at that time, and I just started in private practice. Like I just started my proper job as a psychologist, and I just did not have the time to dedicate to the campaign. So I did have to pull out. But I still supported that campaign, and I actually moved in that time, so I didn't have the honor to vote for them, and I would have. But I didn't get a good feeling from that campaign that the Greens are like fighters. And it happened again. There was another, I think, the state election. I reached out because they were basically looking for someone to be on the ballot in the southeast area of Victoria. I don't fully know how the state Senate kind of works, but basically what they said was, I just put my name down and they called me, and they kind of said, okay, so you're going to lose, but we just need that. And as soon as they said that, I thought, what's the Trump like part of me came back saying, why are you going to put me on the ballot if I'm going to lose? And no, look, I don't think that person, whoever replaced was instead of me, won. But that defeatist attitude, even if that's true, I don't want to go in with that feeling. I want to go in going, I'm going to win, and I'm only going to run if I'm going to win. Now, the odds might be stacked against me. It doesn't mean I'm going to try everything I can, because they basically said, oh, you're just a token candidate. We're not going to put any investment at all. I just don't agree with that approach. Now, maybe that's a little bit, again, optimistic or unrealistic, that maybe there are places where parties should just not invest the money because it's not worth it. But that's not the kind of party that I want to be a part of. I want a party that fights in all areas, especially if you're looking at these policies that would benefit everyday Aussies. Why don't you fight in all those areas and try and expand your margin? I just don't get that. So after that was about 20, I think that might have been the state election 2022 as well. So that was late 2022. And then I think I left the party shortly after that. What also flipped me to, and I haven't even really mentioned it, this will be a big part of part 2 of this video, is that in 2022 was the rise of the independents and people like Monique Ryan and Zoe Daniel in Victoria in particular, the Teals, who knocked off these two like Liberal seats. It was unheard of that they could possibly win, and they ended up winning. And because I drove through Monique Ryan's electorate of Kooyong around that time and was seeing her placards go up, and she had a big office on the corner of the Camberwell Junction, and that seemed to me like an exciting campaign. And then looking at some of her policies, look, again, I wouldn't fully agree with her on every single one of her policies, but she had common sense policies about reducing the HEX debt indexation, a lot of they wanted to establish the anti-corruption commission, a lot of good environmental policies that were very similar to the Greens policies, but much more about investment in clean energy and making sure that that investment, that transition to clean energy, is done in a responsible way where businesses don't have to suffer. We're not punishing necessarily, or doing it too early, where we are a coal and we rely on those minerals now, but recognizing we do need to transition away from that. I thought the Teals had a much better approach to that and a much better way of, and I know that their criticism, which I'll get into in the next video, is like the idea of tree Tories, that they're kind of economically right wing and they're just socially on the left. But I still think a lot of their economic policies do meet the needs of everyday Aussies as well. And so I can't say I joined the Teals because they're not a party, but it made me look more into independents. And then this 2025 election, independents like Ben Smith and Alex Dyson, I always get his name wrong, Alex Dyson from out in Wannon, like the west of Victoria. Really interesting campaigns. The problem was, where I lived in my electorate, there were no independents running, and I felt really despondent and quite politically homeless, because really my two choices, because I'm not going to vote for really any right-wing party, was Labor or the Greens. And again, Labor have all the problems that I've stated before, that I just don't fully trust them to do the right thing by everyday Aussies. Again, Labor also markets to everyday Aussies, and definitely in some ways do a lot more for everyday Aussies than the Liberal Party. I sort of felt forced in a way to vote for the Greens. I could have donkey voted, but I do feel like that is like wasting a vote. And I think I'm going to speak to some donkey voters, or more non-voters moving forward. So I do understand that feeling, because I really was close to doing that. But essentially, what I feel about the Greens now is that I can't ever see myself rejoining them. I think I've left them for good. I think their problem is they need to decide what they're going to do. They're really at a crossroads. They're either going to take the message that they learned from this election and be a little bit more modest, be a little bit more moderate, like dial back some of the more extreme elements of the party and focus on the economic message, that everyday Aussies are hurting. The cost of living is affecting 99% of the population. Even like everyday Aussies that are possibly homeowners or have one or two investment properties, everyone is feeling this, and they're right. The corporations, the big businesses are the problem, and if they can refocus that message back to where an everyday Aussie could go, oh, I could get on board with that. Okay, they might be a little out there here and there, but I can overall understand their message and give them my vote. They may be able to increase, because I do think they've hit the ceiling. They went backwards. I think this is probably the first election for the last 5. If we look, maybe we'll have a look at end on our last image here of super prepared I am, aren't I? So this here, the historical primary vote. I hope you can see that. Yeah, it's there. So this is the Greens here. They had one of their biggest ever, 11.8 in 2010, and then they dipped down and slowly. The 2022 they did get back up. So 2022 was their best result yet, and they've backslid this time. And all I can say for them is that, sorry, we had to break up. It's not you, it's me. Actually, that's not true. It's you. But you need to look inwards, like you do after a breakup. I think a lot of Aussies have kind of shifted away from the Greens, and I think it's time for the Greens to try and show a bit of contrition and say, look, we do care about you as an everyday Aussie. We know you're struggling, and this are some practical 3 to 5 strategies that we're going to offer that are really going to help you through this tough time. That might mean dropping some of the social justice stuff for now, or de-emphasizing it, and really targeting the people that are struggling and let them know you're there for them. Because I as a former Greens member, don't feel like they for whatever reason they fell away from that, and it was sad to see. So this has been part 1 of why I left the Greens and the case for the independents. Please join me in part 2, where I will hopefully take a bit more of a optimistic approach, but also I will address challenges with independents and build a case that why I think independents deserve that spot at the crossbench more so than the Greens or other minor parties. Thank you.